whole bunch of provinces.
Mm.
How do we make sense of that?
It's a question historians still debate.
Right.
Yrigoyen argued that the interventions were necessary to ensure fair elections, combat corruption at the local level. But his critics saw it as a blatant power grab, a way for the Radical Party to really consolidate its influence across the country.
So was it genuine reform or was it political maneuvering? What do you think?
Probably a bit of both, to be honest.
Okay.
You have to remember, even though he won the presidency, he didn't have complete control.
Right.
The Senate, for example, was still dominated by conservative forces. Opposed many of his reforms.
I see.
So these interventions, while presented as measures to protect democracy, they also served to weaken his rivals, strengthen his party's hold on power. A clever but controversial strategy.
Yeah. It seems like this recurring theme with Yrigoyen is this push and pull between reform and this need to kind of stay in power. And speaking of contradictions, his labor policy is a prime example, right?
Absolutely. On the one hand, you have Yrigoyen introducing these really progressive labor reforms, laws protecting renters, expanding pensions, regulating wage payments, addressing workplace accidents. His government even started discussions about creating a national labor code, which would have been groundbreaking for the time.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly progressive, especially for the early 20th century. But I know there's another side of the story, a much darker one.
Yes, unfortunately. Despite these reforms, Yrigoyen's presidency was also marked by some of the most violent episodes in Argentine labor history. The Semana Trágica, the Tragic Week in 1919. Strikes in Patagonia in 1920 and 1921.
Oh, wow.
And the La Force strikes also in 21. Hundreds of workers died.
So how do we make sense of this? How could the same president who enacted these landmark labor reforms also oversee this brutal repression of workers?
That is a question that really gets to the heart of Yrigoyen's complex legacy. It seems he was trying to walk this very fine line. He needed to appeal to working-class voters. They were a crucial part of his base. But he also understood the need to maintain order and to avoid alienating these powerful economic interests. It's a classic dilemma for any leader trying to make real change, So he's trying to balance these competing interests, appease everyone.
And I imagine that didn't always work out so well.
Right, exactly. In the end, he pleased no one. The elite thought he was too radical. And workers felt betrayed by his willingness to use force. So his labor policy, while well-intentioned, ended up being one of the most contradictory aspects of his presidency.
And we see this same dynamic play out in his agrarian policy, right? He wanted to tackle land concentration, but didn't go as far as some might have hoped.
Precisely. He promoted agricultural cooperatives, regulated land rental agreements to protect tenant farmers, and he even created a bank to provide credit to smaller producers. Significant steps, yes. But they didn't really alter the power dynamics in Argentina's agrarian system.
So once again, reform, but not revolution. He's chipping away at the edges, but not dismantling the whole system.
Exactly. He's navigating this complex web of political realities, trying to push for change, but without totally upending everything. And that approach really defines his presidency.
It's fascinating how this tension, between reform and pragmatism plays out in so many areas of his presidency. And speaking of pushing boundaries, Yrigoyen also made some bold moves internationally, right? Like his decision to keep Argentina neutral in World War I.
Yes, that was a defining moment in his foreign policy. Despite, immense pressure from the Allied powers, Yrigoyen insisted on neutrality. He argued it was essential for protecting Argentina's sovereignty and its own interests.
So what were the implications of that? Was it purely principled, or were there, strategic benefits to it as well?
It was likely a combination of both. You see, on one hand, Yrigoyen, he was deeply committed to the idea of Argentina as an independent nation, charting its own course. But on the other hand, neutrality brought economic benefits as well.
Oh, how so?
Argentina could trade with both sides. And that helped boost the economy during a time of, global upheaval.
It's interesting how that decision kind of echoes the themes we've been talking about. This commitment to ideals, but also his pragmatism, understanding how to work within this really complex system.
Exactly. And it's this mix of idealism and pragmatism that makes Yrigoyen such a compelling figure. He wasn't a simple ideologue. He was a leader grappling with these real-world constraints, trying to balance these competing priorities. and ultimately leaving behind this legacy that, people still debate and reinterpret today.
And before we move on to part 2, let's take a minute to think about what we've learned so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yrigoyen's first term, it was a period of massive change for Argentina. He, brought in this new era of democratic politics. He made some significant social reforms, and he asserted Argentina's independence on the world stage.
Right.
But his presidency was also full of these contradictions, these moments of progress, followed by, these episodes of repression, this constant balancing act.
Yes, and it's that complexity that makes his story so captivating.
Yeah.
He wasn't a perfect leader, far from it. But he was a leader who wrestled with these, really difficult choices. He was trying to navigate this turbulent political landscape.
Yeah.
And in the end, he left a lasting impact on Argentina, one that we're still dealing with today.
It's so interesting to think about how these events from over a century ago still, resonate with what's happening in Argentina today. So many of the same issues, the fight for real democracy, the role of the working class, the issue of economic inequality. All still very relevant today. But we'll dig into that and more when we return for part 2 of our deep dive into the presidency of Hipólito Yrigoyen. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Hipólito Yrigoyen's first presidency in Argentina, a turbulent but also transformative time.
Yeah, and as we've heard, it was, this period of immense change,
right,
with Yrigoyen pushing for democratic reforms and social progress, but also marked by these contradictions, moments of progress kind of overshadowed by these episodes of repression.
Yeah, those inherent tensions are really key to understanding his legacy and impact on Argentina. It's not just about the specific policies, but also how they played out in the long term and the sometimes unintended consequences.
Let's talk about those long-term impacts then.
Right.
We've touched on his, provincial interventions, labor reforms, agrarian policies.
Right.
Did they really create lasting change? Or did they just shift the power dynamics without really addressing the root issues?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Take the provincial interventions, for example. They were often justified, as we said, as a way to ensure fair elections.
Right.
But they also had this effect of strengthening the radical party's hold on power. It's this complex situation. You could argue he was, dismantling the old corrupt system.
Right.
But he was also consolidating his own party's influence in the process.
So a bit of a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
Democratization, but also kind of political maneuvering.
Precisely.
Oh.
And you see a similar thing with his labor policy. Introduced progressive reforms,
right,
but then resorted to those really harsh measures when there were strikes. So was he really committed to, improving the lives of working people?
No.
Or was he more concerned with maintaining order and protecting the elite?
It's a tough question.
It is.
And it doesn't seem like there are easy answers.
No.
Do you think he was genuinely trying to, find some kind of balance? Or was he just kind of reacting to events as they unfolded? Maybe without a clear long-term plan.
It was probably a mix of both. Remember, Yrigoyen was in uncharted territory,
Right.
The first radical president, the first to break the conservatives' grip on power. He had this immense pressure from all sides.
Oh, I can imagine.
Those demanding radical change.
Right.
And those who wanted to keep things exactly the same.
It sounds incredibly challenging.
It was.
And I imagine that Yrigoyen's own personality, his leadership style, also played a part in how these events unfolded.
Oh, absolutely. Yrigoyen was a very complex and enigmatic figure.
Okay.
Deeply respected by his followers who saw him as a champion of the people, almost like a moral leader who was there to rescue Argentina from, corruption and decadence.
Okay.
He was known for his personal austerity, his almost mystical aura.
Wow.
And he could really connect with the masses, but he was also a very private person.
Oh, okay.
And his governing style, people criticized it for being, secretive and autocratic.
So even his personality kind of reflects those same contradictions we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The reformer who could be authoritarian.
Right.
This man of the people who was also shrouded in secrecy.
Exactly. And that just added to the intrigue and debate surrounding his presidency.
Right.
Some historians argue that his enigmatic nature was deliberate.
Oh, interesting.
A way to cultivate this aura of mystery and maintain a tight grip on power.
Right.
But others, they think it was just his personality.
Okay.
His deep belief in his own moral authority and his unwillingness to, share power.
It's fascinating how much his personality might have shaped his actions and ultimately his legacy. It sounds like he wasn't just, reacting to events, but actively shaping them, using his style of leadership to try and steer Argentina towards this new future.
Precisely. And this is what makes studying Yrigoyen so compelling. It's not just the historical facts. It's about understanding the man himself. His motivations, his flaws, his brilliance, trying to unravel, the tapestry of his personality and leadership.
And it seems like we're only scratching the surface here.
We are.
There's so much more to explore. We haven't even touched on the global context.
Right.
This was, World War I, the Russian Revolution, labor uprisings all over the place. How did all of that impact Argentina and Yrigoyen?
That's a crucial point. Yrigoyen couldn't just focus on, domestic stuff. He had to deal with this rapidly changing world.
Right.
His decision to keep Argentina neutral during World War I, that's a great example. It was a bold move.
Right.
But that had huge consequences. It allowed Argentina to benefit economically, trading with both sides.
Right.
But it also strained relations with some countries, and it positioned Argentina as this truly independent player on the world stage.
It's fascinating to think how those global events might have influenced his thinking and actions. Did they make him more cautious, more determined to keep things stable at home? Or did it kind of embolden him, this belief in Argentina's unique path and potential?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that historians are still debating. Some argue that the global turmoil made Yrigoyen more, inward-looking.
Yeah.
More focused on preserving Argentina's neutrality and stability amidst all this chaos.
Right.
But others, they think it strengthened his resolve to chart that independent course, resist pressure from bigger powers and pursue this vision of social justice that really resonated with ordinary Argentines.
It's like he was trying to balance shielding Argentina from all these storms brewing around the world, but also like seizing the opportunities for a nation trying to assert itself.
Yeah, and this balancing act, this constant negotiation between internal and external pressures, between holding on to the old ways and embracing the new, this really defines Yrigoyen's presidency, and it makes it so relevant to understanding Argentina's journey.
It sounds like we need like a whole separate deep dive just to explore those international aspects. Yeah. But for now, let's bring our focus back home, domestically.
Okay.
We've talked about the contradictions and complexities of his policies.
Right.
But what about the man himself? What was it about his personality, his leadership, that made him connect with people in such a profound way?
Yrigoyen was a master of symbolism and rhetoric.
Okay.
He cultivated this image of himself as a man of the people, a humble servant of the nation, completely different from the corrupt and self-serving elites who had been in charge for so long.
Right.
He rarely gave speeches or interviews.
Oh, wow.
He preferred to communicate through these carefully crafted pronouncements and symbolic gestures that fueled this mystique around him and solidified his image as this righteous leader.
So he was a man of few words.
Yeah.
But those words carried a lot of weight. He understood, the power of imagery, of connecting with people on this emotional level. Yeah. It's almost like he was a precursor to the modern populist leader.
You could definitely draw parallels to modern day populism.
Yeah.
He understood how important it was to, appeal to people's emotions, tap into their hopes and fears, present himself as this embodiment of their aspirations. And it was this ability to connect with the masses, to mobilize them, that allowed him to challenge the system and usher in this new era.
It's incredible how much we can learn from studying leaders like Yrigoyen, even though he lived, over a century ago. Their stories, their triumphs and failures, they offer valuable insights into leadership, the challenges of social and political change, and this timeless human desire for progress and justice,
Absolutely. By delving into the past, by really examining those who came before us, we gain this this deeper understanding, not just of history itself, but also ourselves, our societies, and these struggles that shape our world. And as we'll see in the final part of our deep dive, the lessons we learn from Yrigoyen, they continue to resonate in Argentina and beyond.
Stay with us as we explore lasting effects of his rule and his legacy. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Hipólito Yrigoyen's presidency.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Exploring his reform, the contradictions, his leadership style, and how he handled, those domestic and international challenges.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey so far.
It has.
Now, let's focus on the lasting impact of all of this. We've talked about how his first term was this, period of immense change, but also how it maybe set the stage for future problems down the line. So what happened next? Did his second term kind of build on that foundation, or did things take a different turn?
Well, his second term, that's a whole other story.
Right.
That deserves its own deep dive.
We might have to do that.
But I can tell you that a lot of the issues and tensions we've talked about, the struggle for real democracy, the role of the working class, the whole land ownership question, and that balance of power between the president and the legislature, well, they all just kind of kept simmering, and eventually things boiled over.
It sounds like his presidency was this catalyst for change, but maybe not always in the way he hoped. Do you think maybe his reforms, while important, didn't really go far enough?
That's a view that a lot of historians have. He challenged the old order, but he didn't completely get rid of it. And so he may have inadvertently created this space for new conflicts to emerge.
It's like he opened Pandora's box.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
He unleashed all these powerful forces, for social and political change, but then he struggled to actually control them.
Exactly, and that really speaks to the challenges of any leader who's trying to make fundamental change. You can't just overturn centuries of power structures and expect everything to just, fall into place.
Right.
There's always going to be pushback, unintended consequences, new problems to solve.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that history's not, this neat and tidy thing.
Oh, no, not at all.
It's messy, unpredictable.
Absolutely.
And speaking of contradictory forces, it's interesting how Yrigoyen himself was such a mix of all these different things. He was a champion of democracy, but also he could be authoritarian. He was a man of the people, but, shrouded in all this secrecy. He was a reformer, but also a pragmatist.
Yeah, and that's what makes him so interesting, so enduring in Argentine history. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain.
Right.
He was just, he was human with all the flaws and contradictions that come with that. And his story reminds us that, leadership isn't about simple stories or easy answers. It's about making these really tough choices, balancing all these competing priorities and just trying to do what you think is right, even when you don't really know what the right path is.
It's a good reminder that even the best leaders can make mistakes. And, progress is often this messy and imperfect journey.
Absolutely. And it's through that process, through those struggles that we learn and grow,
right,
both as individuals and as societies. And Yrigoyen's legacy really shows that he might not have achieved everything he set out to do, but he definitely left a mark, one that still shapes Argentina today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you would leave our listeners with? What can we learn from Yrigoyen's presidency, from his successes, his failures?
I think one of the most important lessons is that change is rarely easy.
Right.
It takes vision, courage, and this willingness to challenge the status quo. But it also takes, pragmatism.
Yeah.
This understanding that you have to compromise sometimes, and that there will be consequences you didn't anticipate.
It's like a balancing act, right?
It is.
Holding on to your ideals, but also being willing to adapt and change.
Exactly. And another takeaway is that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being authentic.
Yeah.
Staying true to your values and trying to make things better, even when you mess up along the way.
And Yrigoyen's story really shows us that history isn't just these facts and dates in a textbook. It's the lives of real people,
It is.
With all their complexities, their dreams, their struggles, and their victories.
Absolutely. And by by studying history, by really engaging with those stories, we understand ourselves better. We understand our societies better.
Right.
And the things that shape our world, we learn from the past, not to dwell on it,
right,
but to use it to make our present better.
Yeah.
And to inspire us to build a better future.
I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Hipólito Yrigoyen's presidency. We hope you've enjoyed it, and that you'll keep exploring this really pivotal period in Argentine history.